Hey, I'm Gino. I'm a fourth year ENT resident at Emory University. There's been a few med students that have reached out to me kind of for general guidance for help for this interview cycle. So I want to make a quick video kind of going over interview questions and things to think about during the interview process itself. I know that it's COVID still and virtual interviews are still a thing, unfortunately. Hopefully next year will lighten up, but I'm here to help you for this year. Basically, the questions are the basic get to know you questions, the weird questions, and any other kind of tidbits that I can remember. So, as a background for myself, I fortunately had 16 invites, and that's likely because I've also applied on a very good year with not that many applicants. And if you do the math, I probably interviewed in 150 individual rooms because if you're interviewing between 8 to 12 attending / rooms per institution, that's kind of how it goes. So I got a lot of questions during that interviews cycle, and then I was able to interview a couple years ago for our institution, so I was able to see the rank list and kind of the things that people talked about during rank meetings themselves. And then last year with having virtual interviews, I was able to talk to my co-residents and attendings that went through that process, kind of how it differed from that aspect. So I want to kind of summarize the main questions that you should be thinking about, and just know that as you go through this interview process, like it does get easier and easier because you'll see that the questions are very similar between rooms to rooms. But I just want to kind of make this video to kind of highlight the common ones and also the uncommon ones that you should probably prepare for. The first thing I want to talk about is just the overarching theme about interviews itself. One is that congratulations, you made it through that hurdle where they academically look at you and kind of see what your extracurriculars are and stuff. So from my experience, from my own interview process, and from when I interviewed and from the rank meetings I've heard about, a lot of the interview process is about personality match and making sure that you'll be happy at the program. And that's for you to know, and that's for the attendings to also evaluate. And that's where the rank process really does shine in terms of you always hear like the match is med student oriented, and I find that is true. The programs themselves want to find someone that will be happy at that program. No one wants a resident that's disgruntled because they did not match at a place they want to go to. So just trust the process, it'll work out, and just be yourself. The first thing is just to recognize the organization of interviews. So at least for ENT at our program, most of the attendings are just going to try to get to know you from whatever avenue they are. If there's a global health attending, they'll probably talk about global health. If there's someone's interested in ethics, they'll probably talk about ethics. If you have something relevant on your CV. I will say that in the interviews that I went to at different institutions, there's usually a room dedicated to like research focus, and that's probably the attending that really loves research and wants to talk about that. Some of the institutions I went to, they do have like a behavioral question room that they'll give you like a situation of like, you see your co-resident is depressed, like how would you react to that? Or if you see interpersonal conflict between attending and a resident, how would you go about that? And then you'll have kind of the very strange rooms that kind of I have described it now as the attendings are bored and they are doing something that kind of entertains them and it should entertain you. But at the end of this interview process, like you can get so jaded by all the same questions of that I'll kind of go through. But by the end, like I actually really enjoyed the kind of off-kilter questions that I received and kind of those interactions themselves, because they want to see how you react to kind of unusual circumstances. So let's get into the actual questions themselves. Everyone's human. Don't think that this is in a bubble of interviews where everyone's just a robot with weird questions to ask for. Like when you first go into your Zoom room, or hopefully when COVID's over, maybe, they will just ask you simple questions of like, how was your flight in? Or like, how was your day? Did you like the open house? Talking about Zoom rooms. Did you get to explore the city? Small talk. It's a real thing. Be prepared for it. I think there's, especially when you're starting off, you're like so prepared for like, oh, I can talk about research and stuff. But when you first enter a room, like people will be normal human beings where they just ask you how it goes. I will say that this is a good opportunity at this time that if you have a connection to that program, that's a good time to talk about it. As in like, if you stayed at a family's house while you're in New York City for that interview, or if you had visited that area, that's a good time to be like, oh, like I stayed with my cousin who lives in Brooklyn. And that's small connections, like any small talk will bear you a lot of ground in the rank meeting, because they'll remember like, oh, this person actually has some connection to this program. And I found that having connections to a region or a city does have a lot of weight in terms of the attendings thinking about you for the rank meeting. I've been beating around the bush long enough. So the main thing are the general questions. So probably 90% of the rooms I went to asked me, tell me about yourself. And then maybe like 60, 70% of the room said why ENT, or why, what are a specialty that you're interviewing at. As far as the tell me about yourself, I personally use it as a time to just talk about kind of my upbringing of like that I was born in Alabama and then moved to Florida, and all kind of the little background, said a little bit about my family, especially if you, again, going back to the regionalism, like if you have connections to a certain area, like bring that up. I personally didn't really talk about like my professional interests or like what I plan to do during fellowship and stuff, because I knew that those questions would come anyways. So I kind of just left that alone, just to keep that spiel from like 60 to 90 seconds. And the thing about that question of tell me about yourself is you're going to hear it so many times that you will, at the end, like your first institution or your first interviews will be kind of a little rough because you're trying to change your answers. But by the end, it'll be like so polished because you've said it so many times. I personally made it so that there's like a little jokes in there. So in my head, by the time it became a robot, I was like, little joke here, attendings will laugh, segue to another part. So they just want to make sure you're personable, and that's a good time to just bring up kind of just a general background so they get a little setting about yourself and get to know you. As far as the why ENT, everyone has their own reasons. I personally, and I will just warn that, and I'm sure some people have written that in their personal statement, the whole, I love the intricate anatomy of the head and neck, and I was drawn to the beautiful nerves and stuff. I will just warn you that that causes eye roll from from the attending side, especially now I'm a resident and stuff. Like, you just see it so many times, and I personally didn't write it in my personal statement or say that, but I just something to think about. If that's truly your passion and stuff, and you can talk about it interestingly enough and not sound like every other med student, that's just go for it. The rest of the bread and butter questions will focus kind of just about the field itself. So you'll get the what are your plans after residency? What are your current interests in terms of specialties? Do you have research interests that you would like to pursue? Lots of times you'll get asked like, why this program? That's a big one. Again, bring up the family, bring up any connections that you have in terms of like, oh, I've heard Dr. XYZ from a person from your home program that talked about it. I think people want to have some reason to believe that you chose their program specifically, especially if you signaled, in terms of why you're applying there, because that will give them more reasons to be like, oh, this person's actually interested versus someone that's just taking a checkbox. Definitely bread and butter question that most of the time it's usually like kind of the last question is they will talk about your hobbies and interests on the last section of the ERAS. I, for the med students that have known me and I've given advice to, like I always specify on the bottom of their ERAS, spend a lot of time in terms of writing something interesting down there. Don't write the one word running, hiking, coughing, kayaking. One word things just don't spawn that many interesting things. But if you did, no worries. Just make sure that you have some good answers on like, you can expound on whatever you put on that hobby section, because that's the interesting part, that they will normally try to leave your room in kind of a up spirit with just making sure that you're like a normal human being with actual interest. Now you can get also clinical questions, was also a common theme. Maybe like, I don't know, a couple attendings or one attending per institution, but they'll give you a clinical picture. So one of the ones I got was they turned the monitor around, they showed a picture of a gentleman with a neck mask, and they said, "You are the clinician," gave me a short little HPI of like, this is a gentleman, 49 years old, history of smoking, alcohol, please work him up. Just because we have a little bit of time, I basically talked out loud and worked them through kind of an unknown primary workup, getting an FNA, doing a tours. By the end of it, they're pretty impressed with it. If I would not stress about not knowing answers. Again, this is something that the attendings do to kind of just make sure you are even keeled, if anything, not so much the clinical knowledge. A little bit of interesting history about kind of the hands-on portion of ENT interviews. Like, when I interviewed, there was this brief history about Mayo Clinic asking applicants to carve an ear out of soap. And they had also a little bit of little mini skills lecture. There's actually a paper online that you can find about it. But long story short, they found out that it's not so much the actual execution of the task itself, but how you react to it. So this is a good part to talk about, like the weird little hands-on things that I was asked to do as an applicant. This is probably less so during the COVID era, but when interviews come back to real person, something to consider. But one program director asked, I come in a room, there's a pile of Legos, and he asked me to build something. And then we had a normal interview. But I will say it did trip me up, because there's something about like doing something hands-on, but also trying to talk at the same time that really does kind of mess with your flow. Another one, I think it was Einstein in New York, but they asked me to fold origami, or sorry, they gave a little instruction sheet with origami, and you would have to fold it and stuff, and they were asking you questions while you did that. UNC actually was really cool because they had a micro skills section that was very interactive, and you got to see how the attendings taught and how the residents interact and stuff. And I think they got to see you and how you were as a learner. So probably after COVID, they'll probably start that back up. Let's get into like the interesting questions that are kind of funky. What is your spirit animal? It's just those attendings that want to be a little weird. I had a different answer each time just to entertain myself. I said like honey badger, monkey. Just have fun with it. They just want to see how you react. Favorite books? Describe your perfect weekend. How would you fix healthcare? That was a hard one. What do you think about Obamacare? I actually had a couple program directors ask how would you get more medical students involved with ENT. And then an interesting one that I would definitely prepare for is you have 5 minutes to teach me something. For example, I chose typography. I was a studio art major in undergrad, so I was like looking around the room at their diplomas, like, oh, there's a serif, there's a sans serif. One of my friends, he was a DJ, so he actually brought his iPad and brought up a MIDI board and made beats for the attendings, which is awesome. So just pick something that you can do over Zoom that you can teach to the attendings. And in conclusion, I think that's all the questions I have in terms of all the weird, interesting, and standard questions that you get during an ENT interview season. Just the take-home point is just be yourself, be respectful, be polite. bring in whatever connections you have to a program and let them know, because they won't know otherwise. And that's probably the biggest thing that I hear in rank meetings is this person has been here before, or this person rotated, or this person has family here. At least in my institution, we talked about a support system. That is also a common question is when you're having a hard time, who do you reach out to? At least for my university, so much of it is making sure that this resident, if they come to our program, will they be happy? And that's a really important thing that we like to fish out. And I think most programs think the same way. Again, congratulations. Good luck with everything. Let me know if you have any other questions, like how to get lighting in your video screen. And I wish you all the best.